The call for challengers echoed across the galaxy, and when it reached Earth, it was met with skepticism, confusion, and a certain degree of laughter. The Shithrax, a race of towering, six-limbed warriors known for their brutal combat prowess, had issued their annual invitation to participate in the combat trial, a gladiatorial competition that spanned multiple worlds. Each year, the galaxy's most fearsome species sent their finest to compete. There was always an expectation of dominance, until this year. This year, the Shithrax would make a grave miscalculation. Jonah Walker, a former Marine and part of Earth's limited military exchange program with the galaxy's more advanced species, volunteered to represent humanity. He was no general or renowned hero. He wasn't even particularly well-known back home. But Jonah had a unique brand of confidence that could only come from surviving the chaotic and unforgiving streets of Earth's megacities. The decision was swift, and his commanding officer, Colonel Sam McConnell, had little hesitation in green-lighting the mission. "If anyone can survive their games, it's you, Walker," McConnell had said, slapping him on the back with a grin that didn't hide the worry in his eyes. The Shithrax, of course, were not concerned. To them, humans were nothing more than a curious, primitive species. Their planet, Earth, was a death world, one teeming with dangerous, often lethal creatures. But compared to the Shithrax's genetically enhanced warriors and the countless technologically superior species that competed each year, humans were seen as fragile and weak. No one expected the unprotected human to last more than a few moments, much less survive the trial. Upon arriving at the Shithrax homeworld, Jonah found himself surrounded by a colossal foreign landscape, one that dwarfed anything he had seen back on Earth. The arena, which was as much a living, breathing organism as it was a battlefield, stretched for miles. Giant spires of rock pierced the sky, and the ground itself seemed to shift, as though anticipating the chaos about to unfold. As the announcement was made, Jonah's name was met with silence, followed by a low murmur from the alien spectators, an odd mix of mockery and curiosity. His competitors, each more fearsome than the last, towered over him. A massive insectoid from the Xylox tribe, its exoskeleton gleaming in the harsh light. A Vashkor, a race of telepathic giants who could crush minds with a thought. And the Torak, a reptilian warrior with scales like steel and claws like sabers. Jonah was given nothing but a simple, worn-out combat suit that would barely protect him from a light breeze, let alone the chaos that awaited in the trial. No weapons, no enhancements, just his training, his mind, and the sheer tenacity of a species that had survived countless wars and disasters, all without the help of alien technology. "Let the trial begin," the voice of the Shithrax announcer boomed, and the ground beneath Jonah's feet began to rumble as the first of many deadly tests loomed ahead. Jonah straightened his posture and took a deep breath. No one had ever survived the trial unscathed. He wasn't about to let that stop him. The air in the arena was thick with tension as the massive gates opened with a low, resonating groan. Jonah stepped forward, the sounds of the alien crowd echoing around him, a cacophony of excitement, disbelief, and mocking laughter. The first test was about to begin, and the Shithrax, eager to see the human fail, had designed it to be as brutal as possible. The floor beneath his boots shifted, revealing a deadly landscape. Jonah surveyed the arena, a mix of jagged rocks, dense underbrush, and vast chasms that would swallow anyone who wasn't careful. His competitors, already positioned at strategic points, were ready, their enhanced senses and weapons primed for the carnage. Among them, the Xylox insectoid immediately released a loud, chilling screech, signaling its readiness to hunt. The Vashkor and Torak stood silent but alert, their attention split between the approaching trial and Jonah, the lone human with no clear advantage. Without warning, the ground trembled, and massive doors on the far side of the arena screeched open. From the darkened recesses of the arena's underground passages, the Shithrax unleashed their first weapon, a horde of massive, genetically engineered beasts. Towering creatures with spiked, armored hides and ferocious claws surged toward the contestants. The beasts, a mix of carnivorous, reptilian predators and massive insectoid creatures, charged with a bloodthirsty roar, their jaws snapping. The alien warriors didn't hesitate. The Xylox, with its insectoid agility, darted forward, its razor-sharp pincers cutting down one of the beasts in a flash. The Vashkor released a telepathic wave, causing two of the creatures to falter, their minds overwhelmed by the mental assault. The Torak grinned, its powerful claws ready to tear through anything in its path. Jonah stood still for a moment, taking in the chaos unfolding around him. His first instinct was to fight back, but he quickly realized that charging in blindly would be suicide. He could feel the primal pulse of danger in his veins, his earth-born instincts kicking in. This wasn't a battle he could win with sheer strength alone. He needed a plan, something to turn the tide in his favor. As the beasts converged, Jonah sprinted toward a large boulder on the left, ducking low to avoid the first wave of attackers. The ground shook beneath him as the Xylox wrestled with one of the creatures, its pincers shredding the monster's side. Jonah didn't waste time watching. He found a narrow gap between two boulders and slipped through, staying out of sight. He reached into his pouch, a small, seemingly useless kit given to him by the Shithrax before the trial began. He had no weapons, but the kit contained a flare. It wasn't much, but in the heat of battle, a distraction could be the key to survival. Jonah ignited it, throwing it into the center of the arena. The bright flash illuminated the chaos, causing several of the beasts to turn in confusion, momentarily breaking the alien warrior's focus. In the ensuing distraction, Jonah moved with purpose, using the shadows and his knowledge of guerrilla tactics to strike at the beasts' weak points, disabling them one by one. He wasn't as fast or strong as his opponents, but his adaptability, his ability to think quickly, was something they didn't expect. The alien competitors barely noticed as Jonah took down two of the beasts with a precise, well-placed strike to the throat and spine. The crowd fell silent, watching in stunned disbelief. A human, a defenseless, unprotected human, was surviving the trial, outsmarting the creatures, and playing the game better than anyone could have anticipated. As the last beast fell, Jonah stood over it, breathing heavily, his body covered in sweat and dirt. The arena was still. The other contestants, momentarily thrown off balance, stared at him, their minds trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Jonah didn't wait for them to make their move. He turned and took a step toward the next challenge, knowing that the hardest part was just beginning. The silence in the arena was broken by the deafening roar of the alien spectators. Jonah stood amidst the fallen beasts, his breath ragged, his body aching from the intense struggle. His heart pounded with adrenaline, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning for the next threat. The first test had been brutal, but it was far from over. The Shithrax weren't about to let him rest. This was just the beginning. The announcer's voice boomed, echoing through the arena. The first human challenger has passed the beast trial, but the true test of strength begins now. Prepare yourselves for the champion duels. Jonah's eyes narrowed as he turned toward the center of the arena. The massive gates opposite him rumbled open, and from the shadows emerged the first of his dueling opponents. The Torak, a reptilian warrior, stepped into view. Towering at nearly 8 feet tall, the Torak was an imposing figure, covered in dark, leathery scales that shimmered under the harsh lights. His claws were long and sharp, capable of shredding through most defenses with ease. Jonah could hear the crowd's murmurs of approval at the sight of the fearsome creature, already confident in its victory. But Jonah wasn't intimidated. He had fought bigger and meaner opponents on Earth. This wasn't about strength. It was about survival. The Torak's low growl echoed through the arena as it approached, its eyes locked on Jonah with predatory intent. The alien's mouth opened in a cruel, toothy grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth that could tear through flesh like paper. Jonah had no weapons, no armor, nothing but his skills and his mind. The Torak didn't even wait for the fight to officially begin. It lunged forward, slashing with its claws. Jonah's instincts kicked in. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly claws that sliced the air where he had been standing just a second before. The ground beneath him was littered with jagged rocks, and Jonah used the terrain to his advantage, quickly rolling behind a large boulder for cover. The Torak wasn't bothered by the failed attack. It seemed to relish the pursuit, its heavy footsteps echoing as it charged around the rock. Jonah's pulse raced as he thought quickly. This was a battle of endurance, not power. He had to outsmart the Torak, not try to match it blow for blow. Jonah peered out from behind the boulder, watching the Torak's movements. It was fast, but its movements were predictable. The alien fighter's heavy armor slowed it down slightly, and Jonah noted the gaps between the armor plates. That was his opening. As the Torak drew closer, Jonah sprinted out from behind the rock, using his speed and agility to stay just out of range of the alien's attacks. The Torak swung its claws wildly, but Jonah ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding each strike. He waited for the right moment. The Torak made a miscalculation. It swung its arm downward, hoping to crush Jonah against the ground. Jonah ducked low and slid underneath the strike, his hands landing on the Torak's exposed side. With a swift and calculated move, Jonah grabbed the alien's arm and used its own momentum against it, flipping the Torak onto its back. The alien roared in frustration, trying to regain its footing. Jonah didn't hesitate. He pushed himself up, using the Torak's momentary vulnerability to launch himself onto its chest. With a brutal punch, Jonah hit the spot where the armor was weakest, the unprotected joint between its shoulder and neck. The blow sent the Torak reeling back in pain. The Torak struggled to rise, but Jonah wasn't finished. He delivered a precise strike to the vulnerable area again, followed by a quick jab to the side of the creature's head. The alien warrior's eyes rolled back, and it collapsed in a heap, defeated. The arena fell silent for a moment. Jonah stood over the fallen creature, his breath heavy and ragged. The alien spectators seemed unsure how to react. The Sithrax warriors, who had been so confident in their champion, were now watching in stunned silence. Jonah had done the unthinkable. He had beaten one of the most powerful fighters in the arena, and he had done it without any of the advantages that the other competitors had. Jonah wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up, his eyes narrowing. This was only the beginning. He hadn't come here just to survive. He was going to prove that humanity was capable of far more than anyone thought. The trial wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of will, and Jonah Walker had no intention of backing down. Jonah stood in the center of the arena, breathing heavily, his chest heaving with each labored breath. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of shock and growing admiration. He had just defeated a Torak, a species that had long dominated these trials. But the trials weren't over, and the Sithrax weren't going to let him rest on his laurels. The announcer's voice boomed once again, this time with a more serious tone. The trial intensifies. The next phase. The labyrinth of minds. The ground trembled as massive gates swung open, revealing a towering structure that stretched far into the sky, an imposing labyrinthine maze of twisting corridors and towering walls. But Jonah knew that this wouldn't just be a test of physical skill. The Sithrax were known for their psychological warfare, and they had something far more dangerous in store for him. The labyrinth of minds wasn't just a physical maze. It was designed to break the will of even the strongest competitors. Jonah's opponents were more than just warriors. They were trained in mental manipulation, illusion, and terror. As the other contestants gathered at the entrance, Jonah took a deep breath and stepped forward, bracing himself for whatever the Sithrax had in mind. The moment he crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick with tension, and the labyrinth walls seemed to pulse, alive with strange energy. Jonah's surroundings blurred, shifting in and out of focus as his vision became distorted. The ground beneath him, trembled as a disorienting wave of nausea hit him. It was the first sign. The Shithrax had unleashed their most feared weapon. Psychic illusions. Jonah's mind began to play tricks on him. The walls seemed to close in, and shadows lurked in every corner. In the distance, he heard strange noises, screeching, growling sounds that felt far too real. His body tensed, his instincts screaming for him to flee, but he forced himself to stay grounded. He couldn't afford to lose himself in the maze of fear and confusion. The Vashkor, a telepathic species, was known for manipulating minds, and Jonah could feel their presence within the labyrinth, probing at his thoughts, trying to twist his perception. But Jonah wasn't easily swayed. On Earth, he had faced far more difficult situations, surviving street-level warfare, outsmarting gang leaders, and enduring training designed to push his mind to its absolute limits. The fear the Vashkor tried to sow in him was nothing compared to the survival instincts he had honed back home. He focused on his breathing, centering his thoughts. The illusions intensified, but Jonah refused to let them consume him. He had to remain rational. He knew that fear was just a tool, a weapon meant to break his resolve. He blocked out the hallucinations, flickering images of enemies that weren't there, voices that whispered doubt into his ears, and took steady steps forward. As he ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the illusions became more sophisticated. The walls twisted into nightmarish forms, and Jonah's feet began to sink into the floor, as if the ground itself was trying to swallow him whole. The sound of footsteps behind him, phantoms chasing him, echoed in his ears. He knew that if he lost control, he would lose everything. But Jonah refused to give in. His mind was sharper than the Shithrax had anticipated. Using his survival training, he found the pattern in the chaos. He mapped the shifting corridors in his mind, finding the smallest clues in the disorienting environment that pointed him toward the exit. It was a mental battle now, a test of will against the most powerful psychological manipulation the galaxy had ever seen. Minutes felt like hours, but Jonah kept moving, pushing through the mental mire. His heart raced as he reached the final turn, his mind screaming for relief. With one last, desperate surge of energy, Jonah broke free of the illusions and found himself standing at the center of the labyrinth, staring at the glowing exit. He had done it. He had overcome the mental maze that would have broken lesser beings. The crowd erupted into applause as Jonah stepped forward, his chest heaving, but his resolve unshaken. The Shithrax were watching, stunned. They had underestimated him, believing that a human could never endure such a trial. But Jonah had proven them wrong. Again, as the arena settled into quiet awe, Jonah simply nodded to himself. The hardest challenges were still ahead, but he was more certain than ever that humanity had the will to survive. This wasn't just about survival. This was about showing the universe that Earth was no longer to be underestimated. The crowd's roars still echoed in Jonah's ears as he stood in the center of the labyrinth, his mind still recovering from the intense psychic assault. He had faced the Shithrax's mental games and emerged victorious. But the victory was short-lived. The air in the arena grew tense once again, and the announcer's voice rang out, a note of finality in his tone. Prepare for the last phase of the trial. The Champion's Gauntlet. Jonah's heart skipped a beat. The gauntlet was known throughout the galaxy as a test of sheer willpower, a final brutal showdown in which the competitors faced each other in combat, not just for victory, but for survival. This was where most would fall, where the toughest, most resilient of warriors were broken. It wasn't just about strength, speed, or skill. It was about breaking the spirit of your opponent and proving that you were the ultimate predator. As Jonah looked around, the remaining contestants stepped forward, their faces a mixture of focused determination and quiet disdain. The Xylox insectoid, still glaring at him with its cold, calculating eyes. The Vashkor telepath, its skull-like features betraying no emotion. And the Torak, still smoldering with the anger of its earlier defeat. They were all stronger, faster, and more dangerous than Jonah. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he was still standing. The ground began to shift under Jonah's feet as the arena transformed once again. Massive platforms rose from the floor, each one linked by narrow walkways and surrounded by deadly pits. The air crackled with energy, and Jonah could feel the oppressive weight of the trial pressing down on him. This would be a fight to the death. There would be no mercy. The signal was given, and the fight began. Jonah didn't hesitate. His instincts kicked in, and he immediately darted to the nearest platform, using his agility to navigate the dangerous terrain. The others weren't far behind. The Xylox was already charging toward him, its massive pincers raised, ready to tear into him. The Vashkor floated above the arena, its telepathic powers making the air around it warp and ripple, and the Torak began to move with a slow, predatory gait, its massive claws clanging against the metal platforms. Jonah didn't take his eyes off the insectoid as it came closer. It was fast, too fast for him to dodge if he relied purely on speed. He had to think. As the Xylox lunged at him, Jonah dropped low, letting the creature's pincers swing just above his head. In the same motion, he grabbed a jagged piece of debris from the platform and hurled it directly at the Xylox's underbelly. The insectoid screeched as the sharp metal embedded itself in a weak spot. The creature staggered, giving Jonah just enough time to roll away, narrowly avoiding another strike from its pincers. He didn't wait for the creature to recover. Instead, he leaped onto the edge of the platform, using it to gain higher ground. Above him, the Vashkor was readying its telepathic attack, and Jonah could feel the pressure in his mind building as the alien tried to infiltrate his thoughts. But Jonah had already prepared. He focused his mind, shutting out the mental intrusion with a steely resolve. The telepathic assault hit a wall, and the Vashkor's surprise was evident. Jonah launched himself at the Vashkor, his body tense with the knowledge that his next move could decide everything. He feinted left, and just as the telepath tried to react, Jonah pivoted right, using the Vashkor's momentary distraction to land a brutal punch that sent it sprawling back. But just as he thought he'd gained ground, a low growl sounded behind him. The Torak was closing in, its claws slashing the air in a deadly arc. Jonah knew he couldn't outlast the Torak in direct combat. His only chance was to outthink it, just as he had done before. He ducked under the Torak's strike and rolled off the side of the platform, landing on the narrow bridge below. With a feral grin, the Torak followed, leaping onto the bridge after him, the ground shaking under its massive weight. Jonah's mind raced as he quickly sized up his surroundings. The bridge was narrow, with a long drop on either side to the deadly pits below. If he could just get the Torak off balance. He reached down, grabbing another piece of debris, and as the Torak charged, Jonah hurled it at the creature's face, blinding it momentarily. The Torak roared, its momentum carrying it forward too quickly. Jonah sidestepped at the last moment, sending the alien warrior stumbling into the abyss below. Jonah stood there, panting, the sound of his heartbeat thundering in his chest. He had survived the champion's gauntlet, but the battle wasn't over yet. One more opponent remained. The Xylox, still recovering, was watching him from across the arena. The crowd was silent, but Jonah knew that his final test had just begun. Only one would leave the arena alive. And it was going to be him. Jonah stood on the narrow platform, his body trembling with fatigue. He had survived the gauntlet, and against all odds, he had eliminated the Torak. The Xylox insectoid was the last remaining opponent, still wounded but deadly. Its gleaming exoskeleton, now stained with its own blood, shifted and clicked as it eyed Jonah from across the arena, its mandibles snapping in anticipation. The insectoid let out a low, terrifying hiss, signaling that it was ready for the final fight. The tension in the air was palpable, and the crowd, which had been strangely quiet after the Torak's defeat, now buzzed with a mix of disbelief and admiration. Jonah was still standing, and the Xylox's scowl was proof of how little they had expected from the human. It would be a battle like no other. the last two survivors of the trial, each on opposite ends of the platform. Jonah wiped the blood and sweat from his brow, his muscles aching and his breath ragged. He knew he couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. The Xylox might have been injured, but it was still an incredibly lethal creature. It was fast, powerful, and its exoskeleton was nearly impervious to most attacks. Jonah had learned that much over the course of the gauntlet. The insectoid advanced with terrifying speed, its pincers clicking in rapid succession, creating a deafening noise that echoed through the arena. Jonah's mind raced. He couldn't rely on his strength alone. He had to outsmart the Xylox, just as he had done with the Torek. He needed to use its speed and arrogance against it. The Xylox lunged first, its pincers aimed straight for Jonah's chest. He dropped to the ground, rolling under the attack and narrowly avoiding the sharp blades that missed by inches. The platform beneath him creaked under the force of the insectoid's strike, but Jonah quickly regained his footing, scanning for his next move. The Xylox spun around, its speed almost too quick for Jonah to track. He could feel its intense presence closing in again, the air vibrating as it took another swing. Jonah wasn't fast enough to dodge this time, but he didn't need to. He dropped low, positioning himself to strike at its weakest point, the exposed joint where its abdomen met its thorax. In a split second, he surged upward, aiming a crushing blow at the weak spot just beneath the insectoid's armor. His fist connected with the soft tissue, and the Xylox screeched in pain, momentarily losing its balance. Jonah followed through, kicking the creature hard in the chest, sending it staggering backward. The Xylox staggered but didn't fall. It recovered quickly, its insectoid eyes flashing with renewed rage. It hissed again, its mandibles snapping together with a force that made the ground tremble beneath them. It began to circle Jonah, calculating its next move, while Jonah carefully positioned himself, waiting for the next opening. The alien's arrogance began to show. It believed Jonah was already outmatched, that its victory was inevitable. But that mistake would cost it everything. Jonah took a deep breath, locking his gaze on the Xylox. He knew that his time was running out. The creature was too quick, too deadly, and every strike Jonah made was exhausting him. His body was on the edge of collapse, but his resolve remained firm. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for humanity's pride, for Earth's place in the galaxy. This battle would prove that humans were more than just an afterthought to the universe's other races. They could stand toe-to-toe with the galaxy's fiercest warriors. The Xylox charged again, but this time, Jonah anticipated it. He used his momentum against it, sidestepping and ducking low as the creature passed by. As it turned to reorient itself, Jonah sprang into action. With a swift, calculated movement, he grabbed a jagged shard of debris from the platform and hurled it at the Xylox's face, aiming for its compound eyes. The Xylox screeched in agony, momentarily blinded by the attack. It staggered back, clutching its face, giving Jonah the chance he needed. He darted forward, using the last of his strength to drive his elbow into the creature's side, right where its exoskeleton was weakest. The insectoid let out one final desperate hiss, but it was too late. Jonah had already exploited its vulnerability. The Xylox crumpled to the ground, its massive form twitching before it fell silent. The arena was still. The fight was over. Jonah stood there, panting heavily, his body covered in bruises and blood, but his mind sharp and clear. He had won. The crowd's roar erupted in deafening applause, a mixture of disbelief, awe, and recognition. Jonah Walker, the human who had no business being here, had not only survived the trial, he had conquered it. As the announcer's voice boomed through the arena, Jonah allowed himself a brief, tired smile. He had proven to the universe that humanity was not to be underestimated. Earth was no longer just a footnote in the galaxy's history. It had just taken its place among the stars. And Jonah, against all odds, had led the way. The silence in the arena lingered for a few moments after the final blow. Jonah stood over the fallen Xylox, his chest heaving as his adrenaline slowly started to ebb away. The pain in his body, bruised, battered, and torn, was starting to catch up to him, but his mind was clear. He had won, and that reality still felt surreal. Then, as if on cue, the arena erupted into a cacophony of sound. The alien spectators screamed, clapped, and whistled in awe, their voices echoing off the towering walls. Jonah's ears rang, his vision blurred, but the sheer energy of the crowd filled him with an unfamiliar sense of triumph. He had done it. The impossible had become reality. He didn't let himself get lost in the moment, though. This victory wasn't just about proving something to the aliens. It was about showing them that humans were more than just another species to exploit. They were survivors, warriors in their own right. The announcer's booming voice broke through the commotion, calling out to the crowd. The champion of the Sithrax trials, the human Jonah Walker, has triumphed against all odds. The sound of his name echoed around the arena, followed by another roar from the audience. Jonah felt the weight of their gazes on him, but he didn't bask in the attention. Not yet. A large platform began to descend from the sky, with towering Sithrax leaders standing on it, their gaze fixed on Jonah. These were the highest-ranking members of the Sithrax Military Council, creatures whose power extended beyond the arena. They were the ones who controlled the trials, and they were the ones who would decide his fate. Jonah kept his posture firm and steady as the platform touched down. The Sithrax had expected him to fail, to falter in the trials, to die like so many others before him. But he hadn't. He had destroyed their expectations with every fight, each victory a testament to his indomitable will. The largest of the Sithrax warriors, their leader, stepped forward. Its massive form, armored in black and gold plating, loomed over Jonah. Its voice was deep, rumbling, like the sound of tectonic plates shifting. Human, it said, its mandibles clicking together in a rhythmic pattern. You have defeated the Xylox. You have overcome the mental labyrinth. You have proven yourself in the gauntlet. But you are more than just a survivor. You are formidable. Jonah stood tall, meeting the creature's gaze, unwavering. I told you I wasn't here just to survive, he replied, his voice low but filled with conviction. I'm here to show you that humans can fight, and we can win. The Sithrax leader's mandibles clicked again, a sound that, to Jonah, could have been interpreted as a gesture of respect. Indeed, it rumbled. You have earned your place here, and we acknowledge your strength. You have earned more than just victory. You have earned recognition. Jonah's mind raced as the word sank in. Recognition. What did that mean? In this world, where every race considered itself superior to the others, was that a mark of honor? Or would it lead to something more dangerous? The leader raised one clawed hand, signaling to the other Sithrax. We offer you a choice, human, it said. Your victory here will not go unnoticed. We offer you the chance to become part of the Sithrax dominion, to serve as a champion for our people. You will represent the strength of your species in the galaxy's greatest arenas. You will be feared. You will be respected. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. The offer was tempting. To be part of something bigger than himself. To gain the power to protect his people from the countless dangers in the galaxy. But at what cost? And if I refuse? Jonah asked, keeping his tone steady, though his mind raced with possibilities. The leader paused, a flicker of something in its glowing eyes. Then you will leave the arena as you came, in peace. But know this, human. The galaxy will not forget what you've done here today. Your name will echo across the stars, and it will be remembered. Jonah's gaze remained locked on the Sithrax leader, the weight of the decision pressed down on him. Becoming a champion for the Sithrax could grant him unparalleled power, but it would also tie him to a brutal and merciless empire. He had fought for humanity's survival, but would he be willing to compromise the very principles that had brought him this far? After a moment's silence, Jonah finally spoke, his voice unwavering. I didn't come here to join anyone. I came here to show that Earth is no one's servant. You'll remember my name, but you won't control me." The Sithrax leader stared down at Jonah for a long moment, its mandibles clicking in thought. The air felt thick, charged with tension. But then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it nodded, as though understanding something fundamental about Jonah. "Very well," it said. "You have made your choice, human, and the galaxy will indeed remember your name." As the leader turned, and the platform began to rise, Jonah felt the weight of the moment settle on him. He hadn't chosen power, wealth, or fame. He had chosen freedom, and as the audience's cheers reverberated through the arena, Jonah Walker knew one thing for certain. His fight had only just begun. The universe would remember him, not as a pawn, but as a force to be reckoned with. The platform rose higher, disappearing into the shadows above, and the arena slowly quieted as the final echoes of the Sithrax leader's words reverberated. Jonah stood alone at the center, still feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His heart pounded with adrenaline, but there was something else, something more profound. The decision he had made wasn't just a defiance against the Sithrax, it was a statement to the entire galaxy. Humanity wouldn't bow. Humanity would stand tall. The arena lights dimmed, and Jonah took a long, steadying breath. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but there was a fire in his chest, a fire that told him this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. As the other contestants were removed from the arena, Jonah's gaze shifted to the colossal viewing screens, where the faces of countless alien species watched him. His victory would ripple through the galaxy like a shockwave, reaching planets and star systems far beyond this arena. What they thought of him, what they thought of Earth, would never be the same. He had made his mark, and now he would have to live with the consequences of it. Behind him, the doors of the arena opened, and a familiar figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Leah Mason, the human emissary who had been part of the diplomatic team that had arranged the trial. She had watched everything from the stands, and now her eyes were fixed on Jonah with a quiet admiration. She had believed in him when no one else had. "Well done," she said, her voice calm but filled with respect. "I didn't doubt you for a second." Jonah gave her a tired but sincere smile. "I almost doubted myself a few times, but I couldn't let up. Not with everything riding on this." Leah stepped forward, glancing at the empty arena with a slight frown. "You've shown them something they'll never forget. You've proven that humanity can stand on its own. But it's not over. There's more at stake than just one victory." Jonah nodded. He knew what she meant. The Sithrax might have respected him, but their empire was vast and unpredictable. His refusal to join them had likely earned him more enemies than allies. He could feel the weight of their gaze on him, even now. "I've made my choice," Jonah said firmly, his voice resolute. "But Earth's place in this galaxy is still uncertain. We've been isolated for too long. The universe is full of threats, some far worse than the Sithrax. It's time we take a stand, and not just for ourselves. We need allies." Leah studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "And you think you can lead humanity to that position?" she asked quietly. "After everything you've just gone through?" Jonah didn't hesitate. "I've already led humanity in battle. But this is a different kind of war. It's not just about fighting in arenas. It's about forging alliances. It's about proving that humanity can thrive among the stars, not just survive. And if I have to go to every corner of the galaxy to make that happen, then that's what I'll do." Leah smiled, a look of quiet approval in her eyes. "Then you'll have my help, and the help of others who believe in Earth's future." Jonah turned to look at the horizon, where the stars twinkled far beyond the reach of the arena. His journey had only just begun. The battle for Earth's place in the galaxy was far from over. He had earned the attention of the galaxy's most powerful factions, but now, the true test would be to prove that humanity wasn't just a one-time contender. In that moment, as the cheers from the audience continued to echo in his mind, Jonah Walker realized that his fight would extend far beyond the trials. It would be a fight for survival, for power, and for the future of an entire species. A fight that would take him into the deepest reaches of space, through alliances, betrayals, and challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But whatever came next, Jonah knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would never back down. He had already proven that. And now, the universe would learn to fear humanity's greatest weapon, their will to survive.